Hi, welcome to the Worthy Physician Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Sapna Shah-Hawk, a board-certified internal medicine physician. Keep life simple. You are human. You are worthy. Remember what matters to you. Our goal is to help physicians remember this and to make it a reality through addressing various components of physician burnout via podcast. This is meant to be used as a tool to help guide physicians. It does not take place of professional medical help. Opinions reflected in this are my own. In this episode of the Worthy Physician Podcast, I sit down and talk with Gloria de Leon and Ernesto Nieto. They are both the founders of the National Hispanic Institute. And one thing I would like to focus on is the concept of third reality. And in this first part, they do go over what that is and the inspiration. The second part is Ernesto's story and what led him to create this thought of first reality, second reality, as well as third reality. And keep in mind, he grew up in Texas prior to the civil rights movement, was involved in the civil rights movement. The concept of existing in two different realities is very parallel to physicians because we operate in the world of medicine, and that is a lot of times contradictory to what we were taught or what maybe we had created in our mind as to when we went into medicine. So I think a lot of parallels can be drawn. Please sit back, listen, and enjoy. So why would I have you on a podcast about physician burnout? But I think one of the conversations we had earlier this week, on Monday, you mentioned the third reality. And so I think that's very applicable. So can you please tell me about yourself for the listeners and who you are, how we met, what you do?
So I'm assuming you're talking to Ernesto now, right?
Yes, both of you.
Go ahead, hon.
The book Third Reality was written out of my grieving for my father's passing. He died in 1993, and it really affected me in a very deep and almost permanent way. And had it not been for Gloria, who said, "Why don't you just write a book about it?" And I thought she knew, probably did, that by writing about it, I could explore my own feelings and look into myself, and so forth. Mm-hmm. Well, what turns out is that it served that purpose. My father's relationship to me was very different than most dads with their kids. We had more of an ideological, philosophical relationship. He loved delving into the unknown. Where are we headed as a community? Who are we as Latinos? How do we change ourselves? Dad rarely made a statement, a bold, a concrete statement. He was more inclined to use questions. Mm-hmm. And so we would sit out in the backyard or go riding out throughout town in Houston. And there was always these conversations that would last 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. Mom thought that I liked my dad more. And my mom got a little jealous about it at times, but that wasn't the case. Mom was more spiritual, more church-like, more Christian in terms of values, things of that nature. Dad was more ideological, more philosophical, and had spent a large part of his life from the time he was about 19 years old, which took us all the way back to 1919 in Houston, and worked in community life through sports, through relationships with a lot of men and women, through church, and so forth. And then in terms of his work, his 30 some odd years of work in the community, he was not by most standards an educated man. I think he went to the 3rd grade. But he seemed to have this fascination, or he seemed to have this attraction to people. And they liked him a lot. And he was rarely critical of anyone, whether they were into drugs, broken families, alcohol, good kids, good adults, bad adults. Dad was not a judgmental person. So he was accepted from many types of families. He was appreciated and looked up to. I had the pleasure of learning from him. So when he died, I felt like a part of me had really died as well. I didn't have that companion anymore who would quiz me. And he would at times make fun of my work, or at times say, well, you're going down the wrong way. So the idea of third reality came on when I concluded that we do live in multiple realities in the world. We whether we like it or not, whether it's culturally, geographically, religiously, socially, we live in multiple realities, multiple social environments, racial environments, gender environments, and that for Latinos, and from a large scale, my concern was that the environment that was being held up for us was assimilation into the American mainstream. And so we did everything that was necessary. Learn English, make good grades, want to go to college, get a job, have security, be excellent, all those things that a mainstream society talks about and prizes. And that yet with compliance with all of those values and social dictates, that we were still not good enough. We were still seen as foreigners. We were still seen as second-class citizens. We were still seen as incapable people and kept within certain social and economic ceilings. And of course, that angered me because I already had my master's at the time I started thinking about that. And because of the nature of my work and what it was going to be, is how do you cause kids from thinking that way? Because that's social conditioning through institutions, through books, through lectures, through interactions. You know, playing baseball was an example. I was always a very good baseball player. I was always being recruited by all white teams, but I was never a part of them. I was just a pitcher that was dropped off at home afterwards. I was never included in their social, recreational activities. I was bragged about. I was given a lot of attention, but I knew I was not part of that. Same thing in high school. We lived in two societies. We lived in the better income, which was mostly white. Then there was a Latino. And those two worlds would never meet except in school. That was only temporary. And then you'd hear comments like coaches saying, we'll never win a championship with Mexicans on the team. Or I understand you're going to go play football in this part of the town. Oh, they don't like Mexicans there. There was always that duality and that resentment and that anger and that sense of separation for me. And when I heard my dad's stories, it was even worse for him and my mom because he experienced America as we know America. From the time he was born in 1903 in Laredo, all the way through his teenage years as an orphan, because he didn't have a mother nor a father, when he moved to Houston to be with his brother. And so he had to experience the brutalities and segregation and separation and injustices in a much more harsher way than I ever imagined. And Dad was very astute in knowing how to maneuver those systems and how he observed things and how he was so dedicated to helping Latinos, both male and female, excel despite those obstacles. So he created clubs and organizations like soccer, a boxing league, softball tournaments for girls, volleyball leagues for girls, and so forth, so that they could excel at something. And so I call that second reality. That was the first reality was how I was born and brought up in a nurtured state, how I was taught to be loving to my families, appreciative of my uncles, my tias, my grandparents, my family members, friends around the neighborhood, how to be respectful to elders. Those are the values that I was asked to adopt and pursue and be respected by. And that's how I was. Go ahead.
So would you say that first reality is basically where you're brought up, your family and your immediate environment into which you are born? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's where I was introduced and taught that, at least I assumed that the rest of the world was the same way.
Right.
And then confronted with the realities that no, the world wasn't built that way. And as I grew older and touched all the right bases, I was a good student and so forth. Never got in trouble with the law or anything like that. I was still rejected. I was still separated. I was still seen as something less. And I resented that because I was brown, and because my last name was Nieto, because I could speak Spanish, and all those things. And so that was my second reality. That's what I call the imposed state. I was being told two things: comply with these standards and values and virtues, and you'll be embraced into the America you seek. And though I complied and I became a good student, got my degrees, became a teacher, and all those good things, bought a car, had a home, all those things, I was still that brown spot on the wall. And it followed me all the way through government, state government, federal government. And then when my dad died, I became very resentful because I knew that both he and my mother never really experienced a fulfilling life, except to be stuck in a reality that they had to be only limited to their parents, to their relatives, to their immediate social friends that were Latinos, and so forth. So they had to jump back and forth, these two worlds, constantly back and forth, from an imposed reality that was not very kind at times to a nurtured reality. So the question for me was, which side are you going to take? How are you going to live out your life? Are you going to be limited to a nurtured reality that's good temporarily, but it doesn't deal with your adult, professional, missionary, or mission-directed life? How are you going to adjust? No, if you go to this other reality, what are the limitations you're going to have to accept as being there, real, and consistent? Or are you just going to wish them away, or are you going to deal with them? And I had many occasions where I almost had fistfights with people and in executive settings because of who they were, how they dealt with me, or their attitudes growing up as a professional. So I called that the second reality. And third reality was what my dad taught me, and that's the most valuable lesson, that I could be the engineer of the world I wanted to be in. And that's eventually where he reached his conclusions about himself and his mom. So they chose to work with the community. They chose to spend the rest of their lives working in community affairs and community involvement, community development in the Latino community, where they both understood their plight, their nurtured state, and their willingness to organize around things that had meaning to them, lifelong meaning, deep meaning, that resonated with their spiritual needs, their ethnic needs, their customs, their traditions. And honestly, I've never seen two people enjoy life more than my parents. They were forever laughing, forever free, forever not angry, because they rarely ventured from that environment. And I see Gloria and I doing the same thing now. We rarely venture outside that familial, modern, self-examining, self-introspective life where we benefit from our thoughts and benefit from support and benefit from pride and benefit from compliments and benefit from being crafting our own life and being in charge of what we want, the values we want to adopt, the values we pursue, the values that surround us, the relationships we want with our children. I have 4 kids. I am the luckiest guy in the whole. I have 9 grandkids. We all get along famously, just absolutely famously. We run into bumps, don't get me wrong. They're always temporary. Gloria's the same way with her family. This morning she was telling me how she's going to drop me off in New Mexico and take off with her family to Colorado. And I have no choice in the matter. And the reason I don't say anything, because that makes her happy. And she should be happy. She should be looking forward to it, because she doesn't interfere with my happiness. When I want to see one of my kids in Houston or just hang out with a grandkid, or she doesn't interfere. That's what I call my own self-crafted state. But it took me, Sebna, years and years and years and years of inquiry, of trying to figure out, why not this? Why must I do this? Why should I do that? Why do I need to live a life of imposition? Why must I merely exist in a life that my first reality of being a child. I don't want to be a child. I want to be an adult. I don't mind seeing my cousins. I don't mind being around them. I love it. But there's much more to me than that. And then what is my mission in life? What do I want it to be? And what really makes you happy and content where time is not relevant? I know that I will die before too long. I'm 81. But I will spend my time pursuing that vision in a very happy manner and trying to figure out where does the next nut fit into the mechanism? Where is the next design? How do I improve it? How do I make it meaningful to my life? And that's third reality. That's being joyful, excited, bound by mission, and enjoying the hell out of it. And I think had I not done this, bad things would have happened to me. I think I might have committed suicide.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I was that angry when I was in my 20s. I think I had lost a dear brother in a fight in El Paso. I was very angry. I was involved in the civil rights movement. I was very distraught emotionally. And then Gloria comes in my life, and I began to unveil a different reality for myself and learn that I couldn't be in control of everything. I could influence things and I could be part of things, but never the commander in chief of everything. And I just made a lot of adjustments in my life that before were either impossible or I didn't think about. But out of that came the idea for what my father taught me. And that's why I called the book Third Reality, because I saw where he and my mother went with it. And they were married for 63 years and had an amazing time, had a little house, had their little income, and just enjoyed the hell out of themselves. I hope that helps.
It does. It does. And so, how does this apply to physicians, or anybody in the healthcare field? And I think, Gloria and I were talking this past week, and, everybody goes into medical school a little bit more resilient than the average, let's say, college student, right? So there have been studies that show medical students enter very pliable, very energetic, and then somewhere in medical school, residency, and then becoming an attending, something happens, whether it's assimilation due to the culture of medical school, residency, becoming an attending. And I understand that becoming, being a physician is you're a professional. But that is such a very broad statement and very broad definition. You can still have tattoos and be professional. You can still listen to metal or classical music and be professional. So something happens along the way where the satisfaction in life and just plummets. There is horrible amount of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, suicidality.
That's second reality.
Yeah.
You just described second reality.
State. Yeah.
An imposed state. So
yeah.
This is why I want to bring you on the podcast, because you've experienced it from a very personal place. And mind you, you were, like you said, you were involved in the civil rights movement. That's amazing. And so just look at how much we've changed here. And I think right now, physicians are really, really going through a state of, there's a lot of pressure because we have to work 100%. We can't break down. We can't take time off. We don't get hazard pay. We have to be a superhero, and we're humans. Oh, and by the way, we're going to take a pay cut because the income from the hospital wasn't affected by COVID. Now, this is not my reality. But this is the reality of some of my colleagues on the coasts, down south, and other places.
Well, I sometimes wonder, the so-called licensed professionals, doctors, lawyers, architects, dentists, and you're going to hear, I hope you don't mind me talking about it.
No.
To me, growing up, I remember young women saying, "I want to marry a doctor." And I never knew what that meant back then. But to me, it was social status. Or a kid saying to his mom or dad, "I want to be a doctor." And mom and dad saying, my son or my daughter are going to be doctors or engineers or whatever. Mm-hmm. Is that the idea of status and social importance was title driven and accepted and became the life mission of a lot of young people because they didn't see through it. They were more attracted by the glitter of what they meant, because I don't think that a 16-year-old kid in high school understands what it means to be a physician.
No.
Right? No. Or even a 20-year-old. So the glitter attraction is what I call second reality. It's status. You own a beautiful home. You have more money than you need. You own better material goods. You take long vacations. At least that sounds like it. What goes on inside the walls may be a totally different reality. Yeah. Depression, anger, fights, may be totally different. But to the outside world, you have it made. And so you're expected to have answers. Why in the hell are you a doctor, therefore? You shouldn't raise questions. You should know. You should have applied knowledge. And so you're made bigger than God. You become soul savers. You become people that kiss your hands for helping them. You become leaders. You become socially acceptable because you're a doctor or a professor or a lawyer. You must know more. You're more appealing than the person who owns a little business or a little restaurant. But the social expectations, those things are not life. And eventually you come into confrontation with what your real social and spiritual and moral values are. Because what happens in first reality is that even as I get to be 81, I know that there is a time running out, and I have learned to quietly observe my mother's values about God and Christ, dying and letting go and seeing things as natural, not being spooked by the prospects of death, ended my life, and so forth. But I think that in second reality, in second reality, you have this notion of being a hero forever, and that's unrealistic,
right?
And it ruins a person's self-understanding of themselves. And you can't afford to lose. You can't afford to be wrong. I'll never forget the day that my dad had a medical problem, and he was bleeding through his rectum. And the doctor walked in announcing that he was going to have to operate on my dad. I said, "You're not going to touch him. You have to find another answer. You're not going to touch my father." He was already in his 80s. And the doctor guy, "Are you telling me as a doctor that I don't know what I'm doing?" I said, "No." I said, "You're not going to touch him. You don't have the right to impose your values and your knowledge on my dad." And he literally walked out, storming out. Well, my dad lived another 7 years. He died at 90, just I just knew my dad wouldn't survive. His pride. This had nothing to do with medicine. His pride would not allow him to live. I knew my father that well. And he thanked me later that he would have just dried up and died out of discouragement. But we have this understanding of physicians as having these answers to everything. I'm working with a young man right now who's in his last year of med school. I forget what level he's in. He's in the final part. And I tell him, "Have you found a good partner yet?" And he says to me, "I can't think about those things." Can I imagine that? Imagine what he just said to me. I work 18 hours a day. Imagine what he's telling me. I'm just listening. My sleep is interrupted all the time.
Yes.
And that doesn't even deal with my studies. And so I may admire him on the one hand about, look at all these quote unquote sacrifices he's making. But I know it's going to take its toll on him emotionally and mentally. I know that he's going to run into the brick wall. And so I love that kid. And I go, you and I need to talk. You've been my doctor, because I call him for everything when I feel like something's wrong with me medically. But he's now calling me for his emotional stuff. And I remind him one day we were coming back from Laredo, and he had this girl that he was going on. This was his freshman year in college. And I started playing some Mexican songs that he's very Mexican. And I was looking at him. He would turn away his face every time I would stare at him while we were driving back to Austin, because he was crying. And I said, if you don't straighten yourself out, I'm going to start playing those Mexican songs. And he just burst out laughing. There has to be a way of enjoying life that has nothing to do with your professional calling. Absolutely nothing. And so there's the opposite. I know attorneys who are ambulance chasers, and they want to set up. I have a son who's that way, and I worry about him, because what kind of home he's living in, what kind of money he's making is so much more important. And so both of his kids go to counseling. Well, why not? He doesn't see the relationship, why they go to counseling, and him. And yet he's a great father, but he buys all the services. If his son needs a coach, he buys a coach. If his daughter needs a tutor, he buys a tutor. Instead
of being the tutor.
Instead of just saying, work it out on your own, and I'm going to sit here with you and hug you.
Right.
The idea of hugging and kissing and assuring and going, even to this day, I say to my kids, you're my favorite human beings in the whole world. In the whole world. Not even your children mean as much as you do. Or I want you to come over and just hang out with Pop. That's all we're going to do is hang out, go get a tamale. I don't give a damn what it is, just hang out. Let's not watch TV for damn sure. And so that's the second reality that comes in. The nurtured state is what's lacking in a lot of professions, because we're supposed to be the superhuman, superwoman, superman, super everything. We fix everything. We're in control of everything. We intellectually deal with everything. We have no emotions. We have no feelings. We just fix it. And that second reality is very dangerous. And yet it dominates Wall Street. It dominates banks. It dominates, for a lot of people, how they live their day life. They live in New York City in little cots because they can work on Wall Street. And so that's the reason for the book. And so I write about death. I write about skin color. I write about religion, because to me, religion at one time was very dominated. I hated it, telling me what to do, how to do things, how to be good. I hated that. I hate someone to impose their silly stories on me. At least I thought at the time.
Right.
Because I was more intelligent. I was more gifted. I could analyze better. My God, But time takes its toll, and time brings you to other levels of realization. And what I'm saying is that, to me, is that we don't get enough. Gloria and I are stupid. We laugh at everything.
I thought that was the only way to be.
From the cats bothering us in the middle of the night. I'll hear her burst out laughing because a cat crawled on me and I threw it up in the air. Whatever it is. Or we have arguments. I mean, serious arguments. But it's about maybe 5 minutes, and we're going, hey, you want to go get something to eat? Yeah, let's go. And we don't talk about it anymore. It's not worth our time. What's worth our time is how much I love her and how much I feel loved by her. So that nurtured state becomes even more important as we get older. I don't want to be known for how much money I've saved. I don't want to be known for what kind of car I drive, what kind of house I own. I don't want to be known for that. I want to be known for how I respect people, how I love people, how I love being around and with people, how being sharing ideas with people, things that I value very dearly. And that's been to the nurture state. The self-crafted state is a little more confusing because if you leave first reality or distance yourself from first reality, and you totally distance yourself from second reality, all those things that we've been talking about, doctors and lawyers, and particularly the licensed businesses, then what the hell do you do? What is the self-crafted state?
What is that?
I'm sorry?
What is a self-crafted state?
It's when you become your own artist, when you allow your inner self to dictate what makes you happy. When you sense the freedom of doing what brings you joy. It's not a rule. It's when your wife goes, I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. You ought to do it more often. Or I tell her the same thing. I'm glad you had a great time. Because we're so used to asking for permission almost. I'm going to be with some friends for a couple of hours. Is that okay with you? We're so used to being self-bound, being self-limited, because we live in these time capsules all the time. We're supposed to be doing this and that and that. And very few times do we do things that truly bring us joy. Truly bring us joy. My joy has been with my grandkids because there's no intelligence involved. It's all human relations.
Right.
It's all telling them stories and watching them play soccer and applauding them and getting them ice cream and taking a nap with them. Or it's a different kind of joy. My joy is writing, sitting here at my computer, just writing my butt off. Sometimes I write 3 or 4, 10 pages and I junk it. It didn't say anything, but it's my right and joy to do it. So third reality, the self-crafted state, requires a lot of patience and a little self-analysis. It's what really brings you joy, what brings you down. And I still have panic attacks. I suffered from panic attacks from the time I was 18 years old. I had one yesterday. And so what I did is I called my doctor friend, who was a student of ours. He asked me a couple of questions and he says, I doubt very seriously you have anything like that. Very seriously, why don't you just go rest for a while? And I go, it's not that I needed an answer, Nieto. It's that I needed your friendship. And sometimes my doctor, Carlos Campos, is my friend. We talk about a lot of other things. He went to Baylor University, and I called him the day that Baylor won and was undefeated. And I said, I could see your stupid chest all pooched out. But, we treat doctors as lords, as these figureheads, as these magical people. We're not worthy of their attention. Just like police officers, they can't enjoy themselves. They have to be cops all the time. Right. And look at their mental state. Look at their way of life. Gloria brought some people that are committee people here in the neighborhood, and one of them was a police officer. He didn't say one word the whole day. Not one word. That was fascinating to me. And I would direct it. How you been? And where do you live? And where are you from? Not one word. I was like, this guy's going to self-destruct in about 10 years.
Those are some of the warning signs. And there is this, and it's not just society as far as physicians, but more administration, more government. And mind you, most government officials in DC make more than physicians, and they get the lifelong everything. So these people that have never touched a patient, these admins that have never touched a patient, are putting these expectations on us. And one thing that I'm passionate about is getting physicians to know their worth, because the physician assistants have figured it out. The nurse practitioners have figured it out. They have these bargaining chips, and a lot of the culture in medical school residency and becoming an attending is very you have to conform. Don't create waves. Don't draw attention to yourself.
Wow.
Just very shut up and do it.
Oh, wow.
Don't complain. We're going to cut your resources, but you're still expected to see all these patients plus more. And by the way, we're going to cut your salary because you're not producing enough. So there's that side that the general public doesn't see. And yes,
y'all aren't all rich, are you?
no, I'm an internist. I'm still paying off medical school. The truth is, medical school debt, mine was $500,000.
Oh,
That's just medical school.
wow.
One patient ought to deal with that.
Yeah. Thank God for insurance companies that dictate how much I get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So there are all these nuances in the business side that the general public does not know.
What would you do if you were not a physician?
If I were not a physician, I'd be an entrepreneur.
Oh, well, you still can be, Sapna.
That's in the plan. That's in the
Yes.
plans.
You can still do that. That's a great idea.
You would be what? She would be what?
You would be an entrepreneur, hun.
Well, hell yes.
Yeah.
Well, hell yes. That's what I mean about third reality.
Yeah.
That I'm by profession a school teacher.
Right.
I went into administration, right? And then I went to work with government because they paid very well, and I had a lot of benefits.
Right.
I mean, I was at the top, and yet I was very unhappy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When Gloria and I became social entrepreneurs, honestly, we had a house with a $400 a month monthly
Mortgage.
rent
Yeah.
mortgage.
I mean, we could afford that.
That's all we could afford.
But
For
you
the
were
first
happy.
25 years of NHI, we lived
Well, we
there
make
'cause
a
we could
lot
afford it.
more, but fulfilled and contented.
Right. But were you happy? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what matters.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying to you is that I never saw myself doing what we're doing. I never saw myself. Just listening to my dad. For me, it was listening to my dad. And then the day of his funeral, there was a guy named Salazar or something like that who knew my dad for most of his life. And he goes, "Hey, Ernie," I was walking to my car. And he said, "I finally figured out why your parents are still around." I said, "What?" "The joy of working with children," he said.
With kids. Yeah.
He said, so in their case, that was who they were and what made them happy. In my case, it's cueing kids about what are the behaviors of success. What are the things that stand in their way when they're growing up, that stand in their way of success, and then how do you navigate that? And the training programs we do are cueing these kids, but fun, a lot of fun. But yeah, social entrepreneurship for us was one of our avenues, but writing was another avenue.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of letting go. If something is that bad, if you're not happy, if you're not thrilled with life, Gloria takes me riding around the block.
Just to get out of the house.
Sure.
Yeah.
We go see new home editions to see how they're doing, what those homes look like.
So how did you start to create your third reality as far as what truly makes you happy? You said that you have to look at, there's a lot of discernment and inner work. How did you even start that, and what made you start that? I mean, I think that for a lot of people, that's the biggest challenge, is like, how do you start that?
Number one was overcoming the insecurity of income. I knew that I was going to have to find consultant jobs here and there to make ends meet. Gloria she told me one day, I don't mind being a secretary. She told me one
If
day,
I
I don't mind
have
typing.
to, I said, I can always find a job being a secretary.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't going to keep us from
It wasn't
continuing to do it.
declassifying ourselves.
It was like,
Yeah, the idea was that we knew what we were going to do. That's number one. We weren't going to quit something and just take off into the dark. I knew that I wanted to create a national Hispanic, I even named it National Hispanic Institute. I felt that the Latino community needed 3 or 4 things. One is a fresh supply of future leaders, given the population shifts that we forecasted. I knew that whatever we did had to be economically self-sufficient. I knew that we wanted to focus on bright, like-minded kids in high school. I knew those things. And I knew we had to have networks of support institutions like public schools and private schools and colleges and universities. I knew all of the above, that we could tie all those networks and strings together. In the process of getting there, or at least having a starting point, I knew that I was going to have to accept whatever consulting job came my way. And I had a lot of friends that offered. So some of the things that I did, I sold freight forwarding services with trucking companies. And you didn't know a damn thing. But I was there standing in line with everybody. They would give you 30 seconds to present your case.
Oh, wow.
And then they would go to sell freight forwarding services. When the ships come in, they unload their garbage.
The containers.
Right.
And so there are these trucking people that are just waiting, and they charge X number of dollars for each container, and then the transportation mileage and so forth. So it's a dog-eat-dog world. So there may be 30 presenters in a given hour. And I was one of them. And I found out that kids without a formal education could outsell me in a second. In a second. and so it was very humbling, because here I was with a master's degree and all that. No, that didn't matter. I had to learn hustle. I had to learn how to hustle.
Right.
And to this day, I hustle. To this day, I know how to hustle. The staff may not know how to hustle. Gloria knows how to hustle. Mm-hmm. But I love the hustle. I love the hustle.
Yeah.
Because it pays off, that you have to make friends. You have to make lasting friends. Yeah, they have to have confidence in you and what you're selling. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So that was number one. Number two is quality in what you did, predictability. Whatever you said, you did. You didn't forget about it. You did it. Creating friends who respected you and wanted to be part of your vision. We had several people that would just give us contracts, sight unknown, or banks that would give me a loan with just a signature. Because we still had to pay bills. That was the other consideration. And then not giving up in moments of despair. That, to me, it was where Gloria really came into play. Because there were times when I was ready to give it up. Everything was down. Everything was not working. And I wouldn't sleep all night thinking about this phone didn't ring, that didn't work, so forth. That one didn't care. That one told me to call back next year, and so forth. So being resilient is part of third reality.
Now, Gloria, you and I had a conversation over the summer. I don't know if you remember that.
Which one?
I know.
We had several.
We did. But I think you said something very, very powerful, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I think you said resilience is not about going through several bad situations. It's, okay, this happened. How am I going to pick myself up and move forward? Thank you for joining us today. This concludes the podcast. Subscribe, tell a friend, follow us at www.theworthyphysician.com. Remember, you are worthy, you are human. Take care.
second time.